Hello, and welcome to NexgenMinds, the informal but informative weekly Sunday podcast made for students by students. I'm your host, Maddie Clark, and together we'll start a much-needed conversation with students, experts, and other special guests about mental health. We'll bust some myths, find out what are the best ways to manage our well-being, and if all things fail, we'll simply manifest our way to sanity. NexgenMinds is part of an important initiative to draw attention to the mental health crisis unfolding amongst the future generation and to eradicate the stigma and taboo of talking about mental health. If you feel that any areas or topics discussed affect you, or you're simply feeling lost or overwhelmed, head to the Nexgen University's website for resources on how to cope, including the 30-day Mental Reset Challenge. This challenge includes short 3-minute videos to help equip you with a toolkit of useful coping mechanisms and ways to strengthen your well-being. So, without further ado, let's start talking and make a change. And welcome to this week's NexgenMinds podcast. Today I'm joined by Esther, Levin and Lucy Little, two third-year English students at Durham University. They are co-presidents of Sightline Productions and on top of that are co-directors of the incredible play that is being released this Friday, Rules for Being a Man by Alex Oates. Lucy and Esther, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Hi.
Hello.
Well, you two are probably absolutely zoomed out by now because for the past 5-6 months, this play has been ready and raring to go. You've done it all online, all through Zoom, and you've been ready to put it on, and yet you're continuously hit with another setback. So I was just wondering what it must have been like to do theatre and put on this play during lockdown.
Absolutely. It's been a bit of a whirlwind of a process. So Esther and I actually decided to do this play, I think back in June, to be completely honest. And so we had a vision to put it on in Michaelmas term. And when we found out, when we didn't know what the restrictions would be like, we thought, great, we're going to do it in the round. It's going to be really interesting. It's a form often not used very much in Durham Student Theatre, and we were really excited. Came to Michaelmas term and they said, sorry guys, only theatre available is assembly rooms. We went, don't worry, we'll do it next term. So we got an assembly room slot for Epiphany, and obviously everything in Michaelmas was cancelled anyway, so we thought, well, we saved ourselves a little thing there, so by moving it to Epiphany. Obviously got to this term and everything was cancelled again, which was such a shame, which meant it all turned online, which I'm sure Esther will fill you in on how that process went from going to a stage show to being a digital theatre show.
Yeah, it was an interesting process. So yeah, as Lucy said, we conceptually came up with it in June, which feels like almost a year ago, but it definitely isn't. And then we've been working on it for about 5 months, I think it is, which at the beginning, Lucy and I said we wanted to have a long rehearsal process to make it top quality. When we said that, we didn't mean this long, but fair enough. Yeah, as Lucy mentioned, just adapting it from stage to screen has been one of the biggest struggles because we'd very much come up with the atmosphere we wanted to create, the style of production we wanted to do, and then adjusting that was really tricky. But I think it's turned out well because even though what we've created is very different to how we would have put it on stage, it still really suits the play and it gives another sense to it. It gives another way of digesting it. And even though, like I said, even though it's different to how we originally intended it, I really hope that we've still managed to pull through and that the same messages come across.
No, I'm sure it will still be incredible. And the great thing is that the fact it's online, your reach will be so much bigger because if you have a laptop and Wi-Fi, you better go watch this play. And so hopefully with a larger audience, the conversation will spread further, which is super important because the message behind this play is, I think, one that is really, really necessary to actually be talking about at the moment. But talking about the play, why did you choose to put on Rules for Being a Man?
Why did we choose Rules for Being a Man? So the ethos of our company is providing a platform for underrepresented voices. And this was something that me and Lucy were really passionate about carrying out. But equally, it has to be something that's appropriate for us to do as two white middle-class women. And something that we can put forward to a Durham audience and have an engagement with and have a reception with. So we were drawn to Rules for Being a Man because we felt that toxic masculinity was a realm that would be appropriate for us to discuss. The only sort of area that was a bit blurry was us being women and it being a play about men. But due to our relations to it from personal experience and the prevalence of toxic masculinity at Durham, we felt that we could give a good take on it and that would have a great dialogue with the male actors and our producers. But it was also promoting underrepresented voices because male suicide is something that is such an issue in the UK. 75% of all suicides every year are male. And yet it's not talked about. And male mental health is such a taboo. And so we thought it was a great way to engage with people who are part of a toxic masculine community and to hopefully try and start a conversation about these topics that people need to be talking about, especially at this time during lockdown.
Absolutely. And when we were deciding on the play and we're opening up auditions and things, there was that big, I think it was beginning of Michaelmas term, the controversy over some of the group chats which were made and comments about women and expectations of men. And that just really opened our eyes. We're going, this is a real problem, particularly in Durham. I think there is a bit of a culture of this like laddiness and whatever that means, that term in itself. And so we felt it was really important to open up this conversation. And also the play is just beautifully written. It's a play about mental health, but it's not just about mental health. It's not one of these plays which really hammers the point hard. It's written with humour and beauty, and the relationships between the men are so realistic and lifelike, and you can go, oh my goodness, that reminds me of X, Y or Z. And so when we read it, we thought this just has to go on in Durham.
Yes, I love that you pointed out the fact that this play isn't just this sit down, we're going to talk about mental health, or isn't preachy at all, because I mean often people associate mental health with this black and white stereotype of, you know, severe depression and suicide, and that a play about all of that will entail a really dark and draining narrative. But actually, in reality, mental health firstly encompasses all of our lives and is always in the background of everything we do. And it's really great to have a play that uses humour and everyday language to show that mental health isn't just this alien issue, it's this universal one, and it's not separate from our daily lives. But you also mentioned the fact that this play would be really relevant for Durham, especially with the Durham culture. And the play addresses really well the concept of men internalising rules of being a man, such as don't cry in public, you've got to come before she does. And this feeds into this image of toxic masculinity. So do you think toxic masculinity is particularly present in Durham?
Yeah, just to also agree with what you said, is that I definitely think this play is not a mental health play or a play about suicide. It's a play about relationships, and it's a play about being a man, but also just being a human being. And that's what I love about it. But onto Durham, don't get me started. I have very strong opinions about Durham. Yeah, I mean, throughout my entire degree, toxic masculinity has been a huge problem at Durham. And it was hard to come into because where I'm from and the boys I'm friends with at home, even though lad culture exists, it's not to such a high level as it is at Durham. And there is very much a sense of the privileged white man. That is a very big issue at Durham. And a lot of the boys have this idea of entitlement to what they do, which can be really frustrating. So coming into a culture of initiations and being forced to do strange things during socials. Some of the things I've heard them have to do are so inappropriate. It's ridiculous. And the uni does try to do things, but they don't do enough. And especially when these messages surface from group chats, like Lucy mentioned, there have been multiple examples of that throughout my 3 years at Durham. And the university hasn't done anything about it. Even with this recent one, I reported in myself because I wanted to have a say in it, that I thought it was entirely inappropriate for men to speak about women, to speak about people of color, to speak about Jews in the way that they did. It was so inappropriate. And I reported it and I never heard anything back. And you see all these signs around Durham saying, report these instances, stand up for our community, but they're not listening. So as much as I think Durham is taking some good steps towards topics such as decolonization, there's so much work to be done. And a lot of that stems from this male privilege culture.
Add another side to that as well, in terms of approaching mental health and how that's done. I think it's probably contributed by this atmosphere, which Esther has just been talking about. Obviously this is not the case for all men in Durham. Obviously not. It's just a small community when this happens, which can spread and cause problems. And I think that perhaps because of that, there is this tendency to not actually be that open with how you're feeling and to bottle things up, which is just the opposite way to heal. And I think it's really important to encourage guys to really just talk about how they're feeling. I know it sounds ridiculous and it just sounds so simple, but it's just not done. I've got many friends I've witnessed who that just didn't happen, and you could see that effect on them completely take its toll, which is why for me I found this place so powerful, because you're going, it's brave to ask for help, or it's brave to open up a conversation. It's not weak. It's like getting rid of this idea of being a man and being strong. It's just not a weak thing to do, which I found really, really important to this idea to share. It's really important.
Yes, I think you've touched on a really, really important point, that the fact that men really struggle to, everyone struggles to express how they're feeling, but I think men particularly find it hard to actually open up. And in the play, there's this really nice metaphor of water, of learning how to swim. And it's almost like our society teaches men how to swim, or like how to go through life, in the completely wrong way, because they're told to internalize all these rules and not talk about anything. And the more you internalize, the heavier you become, and then it becomes harder to swim, and you eventually, like the play says, you feel like you're drowning. So do you think that a large part of why there's such a disparity in terms of like suicide between the genders is that men are continuously kind of told to not talk, not open up?
Absolutely. I think in the play, the way it's written, it becomes quite obvious that each character really struggles to articulate how they're feeling. There's a lot of ellipsis in the script, a lot of hyphens, like they just trail off a lot of the time. And when they are able to talk about how they're feeling, it's physicalized. So not even able to attach an emotion to how they're feeling, which I think is a really interesting way to approach it in terms of showing this difficulty even through expression.
I like this idea as well. The drowning, I think, is such a fantastic metaphor, because it's this burden, it's this weight. And as much as we're talking about how important it is to reach out, it's also so important to listen. And I think that that's another great thing that the play brings up, is that you should also be checking in on people and caring about their well-being. There was, from personal experience, in my first year, very tragically, a boy in my wider friendship group from home took his own life. And watching the impact on my best friends was horrifying. And it was so hard to watch the process that they went through, the guilt they felt when they shouldn't be feeling guilt, and the trauma that it's left behind. And one thing that really cropped up from that wasn't so much that he hadn't reached out, it was that people maybe hadn't taken it so seriously. And that wasn't their fault, and they have no guilt in that, and there's no blame. But even with his parents, from what I understand, is that people didn't necessarily take the concept of feeling suicidal or feeling depressed as seriously and as dire circumstances they should have. And so, exactly as I said, this play should be saying, let's have a conversation, reciprocal. You talk, I listen. And I think that whole metaphor of swimming to someone really says something, because every time his dad takes a step back, he can't reach him. And you need that person to be there. You need to swim to them and have them to hold on to.
Yeah, exactly. It's a two-way thing, that you've got to have that person to listen. I'm so glad you emphasized that, because I think a lot of people are scared to ask people how they are, or even bring up, if you do genuinely think that maybe your friend could have suicidal thoughts, or is, something's wrong with them, the thought of bringing up maybe suicide or depression, or how they're just generally how they're feeling, is scary, because you go, okay, well, what if they are feeling suicidal? What do I do? Do I have to fix it? How am I meant to say anything? When actually sometimes it's just having that release for the person who needs to talk to someone. Having that release is all that's needed, and the next steps can be sorted through reaching out and getting help in other ways, but just getting over the myth that you have to fix it. As a listener, you have to fix it. It's not, you just have to be
listening, and the role that small conversations have in playing a part in mental health and also in suicide prevention. What would you recommend to someone who's worried about a friend or thinks that something's not quite right?
Talking to someone. But what I will say is that you don't have to rely on your friends and your family for that. And I know it's a lot of pressure to put on people, but you have to think of it from a third party perspective, almost, as in, if someone came to you, how would you react? Yes, you'd feel sad and you'd feel worried, but you'd also really care about helping them. And I think that if you actually take that opportunity to reach out to your friends and family, they will respond so much better than you think. But obviously not everyone has the advantage of being close with their family. Not everyone may feel comfortable with friends. And there are some really great services out there. I'd really recommend Papyrus. That's a great one to call and just talk through to someone and to get advice. There's also the Samaritans, of course, which is addressed in the play itself. And even if you don't want to talk out loud, there are other services like Shout, which is where you text a number and you have text messages back and forth. There are lots of different ways that you can communicate with people. And it doesn't necessarily have to be sitting someone down and saying, I'm not okay. But it's so important to have that communication and have that dialogue.
I'd also just highlight during our 2-week run of Rules for Being a Man, if you keep track of Sightline Productions' Instagram page, we're going to be sharing lots of resources around this topic as well. People who have far greater knowledge than Esther and I in terms of psychological help, health advice, all that jazz. So please keep your eye on that, because we really want to support the student community as much as we can through providing that service.
Yes, exactly. I think it's knowing where to find the resources and how to reach out, because like Esther was saying, you don't have to go to your family and friends if you don't feel comfortable doing that. There are so many different ways to find help. There's Samaritans, Helpline UK, Nightline, even your university welfare system is there to support you, and just know that no one's there to judge. Everyone is here to support you and what you're going through. So thank you so much for bringing that up. But just quickly, I know we're running out of time and there's so many more things I want to ask you guys, but as directors and as just generally creatives, do you think that there's like a responsibility in theatre or in media? Because every person, every story that you put on stage, they're representing the voice of anyone who's gone through that experience, any group, culture that can relate to the story that you're telling. So do you think there's a responsibility to accurately portray the issues or experiences that you put on stage, and secondly, to prioritize, like Sightline Production does, to prioritize voices that are often unheard or unrepresented?
You're going into my dissertation here. Well, in my dissertation, I talk about fiction and whether fiction's entertainment or whether it has the power to do a lot of good in education and whatnot. I will not go into my dissertation. Do not worry. Anyway, so no, joking. But yeah, I mean, I am biased because of all of that and all that I talk about within that and that I've studied. But I think that we all have a responsibility to each other. And a big part of that is sometimes putting other people above yourself. That's such a huge part of it. And especially as we've seen, for example, with the Black Lives Matter movement last year, it's about promoting other people's voices and giving them the opportunity to speak and influence and inspire. And as a creative, I think that's so important. That's something we wanted to do with the company, but to make sure that we did it in the right way. We didn't want to take over people's voices. We just wanted to promote them. And I think that theatre can do really wonderful jobs at that. I've seen some really beautiful productions across the UK, particularly at Fringe. There are some amazing ones that I have seen about lots of different issues, whether that's sexual assault or racism, lots of different social issues that I think theatre can do an amazing job at educating us about, but not in a patronising manner, in a way where we can relate to people and understand different cultures, different genders, different types of humanity. It's just a way for us to connect with each other, which I think theatre is amazing at.
And I particularly think that when theatre is live, it has such a power. Obviously, I'm saying this with my production about to go live online, but also, like Esther, actually links to my dissertation. Lovely.
I hope I hope the people who mark our dissertations listen in.
Yeah, same. And I've been looking at this idea of through my studies, the role of theatre and the power of theatre, and this connection between audience and stage, and how the magic, that's a horrible word to use, I'm very sorry, the magic which happens between the audience member and the actor is something which just can't be created in any other art form. You can't get that in cinema or film or radio, because it's so visceral and it's so in the moment. And just for that brief hour, that brief 2 hours, you're part of a world and you're listening and you're engaged with these topics, like Esther's been saying. And I think you leave the theatre with your knowledge has been expanded because you've been exposed to new voices, you've listened. And I think that's so important as an audience member, is just to listen and take in new perspectives. And as a creative, it's this idea of providing that platform to allow more people to listen, to allow more people to understand new perspectives that they haven't been exposed to before, and just broadening your social horizons. It's so important.
Well, where can I buy both of your dissertations? Because I would definitely give them a first. I know I've only had a cheeky sneak peek, but
Thank you.
But yes, I completely agree. I think, like Lucy was saying about the listening, when someone's on stage, they are telling their story. Like that conversation Esther was emphasising, as an audience member, you're just listening. You're letting them tell their story. And I think that's the most amazing thing about theatre, is that personal connection. You're not just looking at the news or a statistic that you kind of become detached, but by sitting and listening and forming that connection, that's when it really hits home.
It's just to add in there, you'll see statistics about suicide and mental health and how they've risen in the pandemic, and I think you become so immune to numbers, especially at the moment with the pandemic, and every night you get a death toll and you go, okay, it's gone up by X amount, and you go, okay, that's not great, let's move on. And you go, that's ridiculous. Each of those individual numbers is a person, and they have a life, and they have memories and friendships and relationships. And I think what this play does is strips back the statistics in some sense and just shows you one of those numbers and shows you those relationships, which then obviously feed into a broader statistic. But it's just providing life and the ability to engage and not become, I don't know the word, like immune to all the statistics and numbers.
I really love that as an idea. And I think exactly as you said, that is so relevant to theatre and with mental health as well. It's always a statistic, but you have to think about the individual people behind that. And it's very easy to brush over things, but if it were happening to you, you'd react very differently. And that's a fantastic thing about theatre, is that you can experience that with the actor. You can go on that journey with the actor. You can hear how they're feeling and how they're reacting. And not only does that open your mind to new perspectives, but it might also connect to you and your experiences. I rave about this play far too often, and they should actually pay me for promo. But I saw this play at Edinburgh Fringe called Electrolyte, which I made Lucy go see afterwards.
It's so good, so good. You should get a commission. You should have got a commission.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, would recommend. Great show, and it's about mental health, and they did it excellently. And I walked away from that show and I thought, oh, what a great show, la la la. Actually, I cried, but we'll pretend like I walked away and thought la la la. But now, when we're in the pandemic and everyone is really struggling with their mental health, a message from that play, exactly that play, has stuck with me. And that was how beautifully her friends react to her in that play and how much support her friends give her in that play. And that will always stick with me, because sometimes you do really feel alone. You really do. And as much as you tell yourself there are people there, it's not going to work. It's not going to get through. But there are people who really care about you. And when you separate yourself from yourself, so to speak, and view it as another person, you can look at that play and think, well, she thought she was on her own. But look at all the people who were there for her. Look at the support that she could receive. Anyone can receive that support.
Yeah, it's so easy to get bogged down in your own thoughts. And I think it's so important to take a step back and reevaluate the landscape and think, I'm okay. Well, it's okay not to be okay, but also to know that I'm not okay, but I'm not alone. And like Esther was saying, no one is alone. Even if you don't feel like you can rely on your family and friends, there is always other resources available, and websites that are there to help you and to act as a non-judgmental space for whenever you need it. Both so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I cannot wait to read both your dissertations, and very exciting to watch the incredible Rules of Being a Man that is streaming until the 17th. So to all the listeners listening to today's podcast, do go watch the play. It is incredible, and its message is so important. But again, thank you, Esther and Lucy, for coming on today. And hopefully I'll have you back very soon.
And as Lucy said, just to say right at the end, obviously none of us are mental health experts. And this is all just like individual opinions and experiences. But we will be sharing the resources on our social media. So if people, want to find these resources, want to learn more, please head to our Instagram and our Facebook.
Exactly. We are definitely not experts. We're not here to give you the psychological rundown of mental health. We're just here to start the conversation. If any topics we have discussed today affect you, please be sure to talk to someone or visit websites such as The Samaritans, Papyrus, Nightline, and many other resources that I will be putting in this episode's bio. And remember, you are not alone. There is always someone ready to help. Also, if you're genuinely just interested in looking after your mental health, there is the Nexgen University's 30-day mental health reset challenge available for free at the Nexgen University's website. And lastly, remember, let's start talking and make a change.